It was supposed to be just another day in court, but it quickly turned into something much more. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and the air felt heavy with expectation. At the center of it all was Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, sitting with her legal team, poised and calm. Across from her, sitting at the judge's bench, was Judge Thomas Hall, a man known for his sharp wit and unpredictable temper. Pam had been called to testify in a high-profile case, one that had garnered media attention for months. As she took the stand, the judge's gaze seemed to linger on her, an almost mocking glint in his eyes. It was clear from the start that he wasn't going to make this easy. "Well, Ms. Bondi," Judge Hall said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I assume you've had quite the career in law. Tell us, what makes you think you're qualified to give us your opinion here today?" Pam didn't flinch. She knew this was coming. She had dealt with political barbs for years and had learned the hard way that the best way to respond was with grace, and, when necessary, with a clever retort. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady, "I've spent my career serving the people of Florida, defending the law, and ensuring justice for those who need it most. I think that qualifies me just fine to speak on matters of the law in your courtroom." The room was silent. Judge Hall raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated by her composed response. He had expected her to shrink under the weight of his words, but she stood her ground. The trial proceeded, but it was clear that the dynamic between the judge and Pam had shifted. She wasn't going to be intimidated. But as the day wore on, it was clear that the real showdown was only just beginning. The day wore on, and the tension in the courtroom grew. Judge Hall seemed determined to make Pam Bondi's time on the stand as uncomfortable as possible. He asked question after question, each more pointed than the last. It was clear he was trying to rattle her. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm once again, "I have to wonder, do you really think your legal experience prepares you for this case? After all, you're no longer in office. You've stepped down from the limelight. So why exactly should we care about your opinion now?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's words stung, but Pam didn't react. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a visible response. Instead, she took a deep breath, collected her thoughts, and met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I've spent years working for the people of Florida, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Whether I'm in office or not, my legal expertise and dedication to justice don't just vanish. If anything, stepping down from the political spotlight has only allowed me to focus more on the truth, something I've always stood for." Her words hung in the air, but Judge Hall wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a smirk that only fueled the growing unease in the room. Well, he said, his tone mocking. "It sounds like you think you're some kind of expert now. How charming." The gallery of spectators waited in suspense, sensing that something big was coming. Pam's response had been measured, but the judge's mockery had crossed a line. The room was about to witness something unexpected. Pam wasn't going to take this lying down. With a calm smile, she looked directly at Judge Hall and said, "Your Honor, while you may not find my perspective valuable, I can assure you that my legal expertise far outweighs the sarcasm you've tried to cloak your questions in." For a moment, there was silence. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see how Judge Hall would respond. What happened next would leave everyone stunned. Judge Hall's smirk faltered for the first time. His eyes narrowed, but Pam wasn't finished. The room, still tense from the earlier exchange, seemed to tighten further. The spectators waited, caught between disbelief and curiosity. Pam had made her stand, but the judge wasn't known for letting insults slide easily. "You think that little remark will save you from looking foolish?" Judge Hall shot back, his voice rising just enough to ensure everyone heard his irritation. "Let me remind you that in this courtroom, I call the shots. I make the rules. And you, Ms. Bondi, will answer to me." Pam's response was swift, yet delivered with the grace and precision of a seasoned lawyer. She leaned slightly forward, her posture unwavering. "Your Honor," she said, her tone never losing its poise, "you may be in charge of the courtroom, but even you can't control the truth. And as for saving myself from looking foolish, well, I think that's exactly what I'm doing right now by simply telling it like it is." A stunned silence followed. The room seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time in the entire trial, Judge Hall looked uncertain. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge of the bench, his usual confident demeanor cracking. "Are you saying, Ms. Bondi, that I've been misleading this court?" The judge's voice was colder now, but there was an edge of defensiveness in it that hadn't been there before. Pam's eyes never left his. "What I'm saying, Your Honor," she replied, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "is that the courtroom is a place for facts, not for mockery. I understand your need to prove something, but belittling people to make a point doesn't change the reality of the case. It just makes you look petty." There was a noticeable shift in the room. The spectators who had been on edge began to whisper amongst themselves, some nodding in agreement. Pam's calm yet forceful words had struck a nerve. Judge Hall opened his mouth to retort, but it seemed that the words failed him. His usual wit, the quick retorts that had made him feared, were nowhere to be found. He paused, looking at Pam, his expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, he glanced at the court clerk, as if searching for a way to regain control of the situation. But Pam had already won the moment. The judge cleared his throat, trying to salvage his dignity. "Ms. Bondi, let's continue," he muttered, the earlier arrogance gone from his voice. The rest of the trial went on, but something had shifted. Pam Bondi had not only held her ground, she had flipped the courtroom dynamics in an instant. The judge, left speechless by her brilliant comeback, was no longer the same figure of authority in the room. He had been bested, and the spectators knew it. The trial was no longer just about the case, it had become a test of wills, and Pam had proven that she was not someone to be underestimated. The trial continued, but the atmosphere had undeniably changed. The energy in the courtroom was different now. Judge Hall, though still presiding, seemed rattled. His earlier sharpness had dulled, replaced with a tension that was palpable. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, was calm and collected. She was no longer just a participant in the trial, she had taken control of the room. As the day wore on, Pam's composure became more evident. She responded to questions with confidence and clarity, never faltering, never losing her focus. The judge, despite his attempts to regain his footing, struggled to maintain the same level of control he had once held over the proceedings. His questions, while still pointed, lacked the biting sarcasm they had carried earlier. It was clear that he had been shaken by Pam's sharp, brilliant comeback. During a break in the proceedings, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. People were talking, not about the case, but about the moment when Pam had turned the tables on the judge. Some were in awe of how she had handled herself, others were shocked by the sheer audacity of her response. But no one could deny that Pam had won the day. As Pam walked out of the courtroom during the recess, several members of her legal team approached her. They exchanged knowing glances, a sense of admiration in the air. They had seen it too, how she had handled the judge with precision and poise, how she had turned the tide in a single, powerful moment. "That was impressive," one of her colleagues said quietly as they walked down the hall. Pam smiled, but her expression was focused, serious. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about standing up for what's right, even if it means calling out people who think they can bully their way through something. She wasn't done. Pam Bondi had more to say, and she was going to make sure her voice was heard. Back in the courtroom, the judge seemed more subdued, perhaps even reconsidering his earlier behavior. He glanced at Pam every so often, as if unsure how to proceed. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The trial continued, but Pam was no longer just defending herself, she was taking on a bigger battle. By the end of the day, the courtroom knew one thing for sure: Pam Bondi was not a woman who could be silenced, mocked, or intimidated. She had made her mark, and whatever happened next in the trial, it was clear that the judge had learned a hard lesson about underestimating her. The next morning, as the trial resumed, there was a noticeable shift in the air. Judge Hall had arrived earlier than usual, a stark contrast to the previous day's unhurried demeanor. Pam Bondi entered the courtroom with the same calm assurance she had carried the day before, but this time, there was a new sense of resolve about her. She had already won the battle of wits with the judge, and now it was time to win the war. As the proceedings unfolded, Judge Hall, despite his earlier defensiveness, seemed to tread more carefully. His questions, once biting and mocking, were now more measured, even somewhat respectful. He no longer interrupted Pam's answers or sought to diminish her responses. He listened. It was subtle, but it was there, a sign that Pam's sharp comeback had cut deeper than anyone anticipated. But the real twist came when the case took an unexpected turn. A key witness, someone whose testimony could have been pivotal to the defense's case, suddenly became unavailable. The courtroom was thrown into chaos as lawyers scrambled to find a solution, but it was Pam who stood up first. She looked directly at Judge Hall and, in her usual calm but commanding voice, made an unexpected proposal. "Your Honor," she said, "I move that we continue without this witness. The truth is clear, and their absence will not change the facts of the case. We cannot allow one person to hold up the pursuit of justice for everyone else in this courtroom." The judge, clearly caught off guard by Pam's directness, hesitated. "Are you suggesting we move forward without critical testimony?" he asked, his tone slightly more cautious now. "Yes, Your Honor," Pam responded, her eyes unwavering. "I am confident that what we have in evidence is more than enough. The absence of one witness should not be allowed to derail the truth. We can proceed without them." There was a moment of silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Judge Hall's decision. It was a bold move, and it was clear that Pam had taken the upper hand in the case. The judge's eyes flicked over to the defense team, who looked uncertain, and then back to Pam. It was almost as though he was reconsidering his previous stance on her. After a few seconds of contemplation, Judge Hall made his decision. "The motion is granted," he said, his voice now more neutral than before. "We will proceed without the witness." Pam's legal team exchanged quiet looks of approval. They had seen what the judge hadn't. Pam had not only turned the courtroom dynamic around with her brilliance the day before, but now she was steering the trial itself. As the trial continued, it became increasingly clear that Pam Bondi had not only survived the mocking judge, she had outsmarted him. The witnesses, the evidence, and even the judge himself now seemed to fall into place under her direction. By the time the trial concluded, Pam had emerged victorious, not just because of her legal expertise, but because she had demonstrated something far rarer in the political and legal arenas, the ability to remain composed, to think on her feet, and to turn the tables when it mattered most. The judge, once confident in his ability to control the courtroom, had been left speechless, not just by her comeback, but by the sheer force of her determination. Pam had proven that when it comes to the pursuit of justice, no one, not even a judge with the power of the courtroom behind them, could hold her back. In the end, Pam Bondi didn't just win the case, she won the respect of everyone in that room. And Judge Hall? He would never underestimate her again. The courtroom emptied, the trial officially over, but the whispers of Pam Bondi's victory echoed long after the last gavel was struck. In the days that followed, news outlets and political pundits were quick to analyze what had happened. Headlines read, "Judge mocked Pam Bondi, but she turned the tables, Pam Bondi's brilliant comeback leaves judge speechless," and, "The day a judge was schooled in court by Pam Bondi." What had started as a confrontation between a seasoned judge and a former attorney general had turned into something far more significant. Pam's composure, intelligence, and strategic thinking had not only earned her a hard-fought victory in the courtroom but had also reshaped the narrative surrounding her career. Where once there were doubts about her political future and her relevance in the legal world, now there was admiration and respect. Pam didn't immediately bask in the glow of her success. Instead, she retreated for a moment of quiet reflection. She spent the following week at home, surrounded by her closest colleagues and friends, reviewing every aspect of the trial. She knew that this case wasn't just about the legal victory, it had been a personal battle, one where her integrity had been challenged and ultimately proven stronger. One evening, as the sun set over the Florida horizon, Pam sat on her porch, sipping a glass of water, reflecting on the strange nature of the legal and political world she inhabited. There had been moments in the past when she had questioned whether she still had the fire, whether her time in the spotlight had passed. But in that courtroom, against a judge who had doubted her from the start, she had rediscovered her true calling. Pam wasn't done with her work yet. This trial had reaffirmed her belief that justice was always worth fighting for, no matter the odds, no matter the adversaries. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, reading the message. It was from one of her closest allies in politics. "Everyone's talking about what you did in court. You've shown them what you're capable of, and you've earned their respect. You're not just a former AG, you're a force to be reckoned with." Pam smiled, her mind already racing toward the future. The courtroom may have been the arena where this battle had taken place, but her work wasn't finished. She knew that now more than ever. The next day, she would meet with her team, plan the next steps, and maybe even begin to consider the bigger picture, how she could use this newfound platform to influence real change. There were still many issues left to tackle, and the world of politics and law could be just as ruthless as the courtroom had proven to be. But after her brilliant comeback against Judge Hall, she knew that she could handle whatever came next. She wasn't just back in the game. She was in control. The courtroom had seen Pam Bondi at her best, and it was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. And for those who had doubted her, it was a reminder, underestimating Pam Bondi was a mistake they would never make again.